Olá a todos.
Hi.
Hello, my name is Nicola Blanc, and with me is my colleague Ana Matias from Sciaena. And we're here today to host a webinar with Professor Rashid Sumaila, who's been very kind to join us and give us his time. So welcome, Professor Rashid. Thanks for joining us.
Hello again.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. I'm going to give a quick introduction about the format of the webinar and also about Professor Rashid's position and topics. This is a series of webinars that Sciaena has been developing, well, since we understood that physical events could not be hosted at this moment. So we found a way to promote public debates on subjects that Sciaena, our NGO, works. Sciaena is an NGO dedicated to marine conservation, so we work a lot on sustainable fisheries, aquaculture, marine protected areas, and marine litter. Those are mainly our focus, our subjects of our focus, and we work a lot as well, like most NGOs, on environmental awareness and education. So that's another reason for us to host these webinars. And today's webinar specifically is with Professor Rashid Sumaila. Professor Rashid is a professor at the Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries, director of the Fisheries Economics Research Unit at the University of British Columbia's Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries. His main interests revolve around environmental and research economics, among obviously a whole lot of different things. And has worked a little bit all over the world, as I'm sure he can share with us. And this idea for us came originally because of one of the last publications by Professor Rashid from 2019, a paper called "Ending Overfishing Can Mitigate Impacts of Climate Change," where for us this helped us a lot understand this concept of how helping to protect and restore the ocean biodiversity and fish stocks particularly can help with the ocean resilience and help mitigate impacts of climate change. So that was our driver to create this webinar. And we're lucky enough that Professor Rashid accepted to be with us today. So the format is going to be very simple. We're going to have a presentation by Professor Rashid and then a space for a Q&A. So everyone that is attending can feel free to drop your questions on the Q&A box, okay? At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little logo that says Q&A. So please drop your comments and questions there and not on the chat box. Me and Anna will then ask your questions as they come, so on a first come, first served basis to Professor Rashid, and hopefully we'll have time to go through all of them, because I'm sure there's going to be quite a lot from us as well. So I think that's it. We are going to record the session, so this is going to be made available as well for anyone attending. You can then share it with some of your colleagues or students or whoever you like. And I think that's it. Anna, let me know if I'm forgetting something.
No,
but I think we're ready to go.
Yeah, we are.
We're ready to go.
All right, perfect, Professor. Please, thank you very much. And you have the floor.
Yeah, you can share your screen.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all those online. I know there's a lot of competition for your time, and you made time to come and listen to some of the ideas, not only from me and my group, but actually from colleagues around the world on this topic of how ending overfishing and actually rebuilding marine life is also climate action, So that is the theme. And what I've done here is to prepare a few slides just to get us going. So I'll just be dropping a few ideas here and there. And luckily, we do have quite a bit of time for questions and answers, and we can do back and forth and fill up and get a debate going on. So this is the way I organize it. It's mainly I start with overfishing and rebuilding, for that matter, and talk a little bit about that just to set the stage for what is to come. And the next thing I do is to talk about climate change impacts, because that's important, right? To the two main pillars of this discussion. And then we go on to look at how overfishing can affect the ability of the ocean to be climate resilient. And so That is our main theme. And then, of course, if we realize that overfishing is a problem, many other problems, biodiversity-wise, job-wise, income, future generations, gender, then how do we, and of course climate change, then how do we try to end this overfishing? This is a decades or centuries old question. We keep trying our best to find a way to nail and contribute to helping to reduce overfishing because of all the benefits of that. And then I conclude. So I thought a nice concept for really looking at overfishing is this idea of fishing down marine food web, which Daniel Pauly published in Science in 1998. I think it's a very beautiful way of capturing what we are doing, we people, both producers of fish and those who catch fish, the fishers, and those of us who consume fish, what we are doing collectively on our marine ecosystem. And this picture to me actually summarizes quite nicely what the issue is. So you look at this, the x-axis is actually time kind of, it's time. So starting from back in the past to the present. And so that's what you see at the x-axis. And the y-axis tells you something about the richness of the marine ecosystem. All right. So back in time, if you look at that, we had an ecosystem teeming with life. We have big fish and we have small fish. We have little fish and we have fish that move and fish that don't move. We have all sorts of connection, fish that eat other fish and fish that are eaten. And all of this, together with their habitat, actually is what makes the marine ecosystem. And in the past, this was quite rich. And as you can see, at the beginning of the x-axis, you have quite a rich habitat with all the other ocean habitat systems supporting the life, big tunas and all that in between them. So this is the past. And with time, what we realize is we are taking down this marine ecosystem. We are taking down the richness and making the marine ecosystem poor, actually, in so many dimensions. Number one, we're just catching too many fish. And so that harms the marine ecosystem. Just the quantity, right? It's a problem because think of a bank account, you have a savings. If you take more than your interest, year in, year out, you are going to go into bankruptcy, except somebody bails you out. So that's what we're doing to the ocean at the larger in terms of the quantity. But it's not only the quantity, it's also how we do the fishing. So the marine ecosystem and the life in it is the food web. And that's the point about the fishing down marine food web. So what we are also doing, apart from taking huge quantities, we are actually taking the big, valuable fish first, okay? So we take the big tunas, we take the big fishes, all that is big and valuable. And in fact, you don't need to target them even. Just by going out with your nets, whether you are looking for shrimp or not, you end up catching big stuff. And this is something I saw live on the South Atlantic. When we went there, we were on a little boat following a big bottom trawler, fishing in the Atlantic there, looking for shrimp. And what do? They catch all these beautiful big fish and they just throw them out because they are looking for the pricey shrimps to fill their boat, right? High graded. It was so terrible. When I saw this, my heart was just bleeding. In fact, what we did was we just followed them and we're collecting the fish. We came back to the coast, had a barbecue with the coastal people, the community, this nice town there, and everybody enjoyed the fish they were throwing out because they are looking for the. So this fishing down marine food web, it's not only that you are looking for the big valuable ones. Even if you are not looking for them, you end up catching them because your net is going to sweep over them and catch them. So that is another dimension to this. Now, when you look at the habitat, we are also destroying the habitat with time because of the gear we use to catch. And a big one here is bottom trawlers. So if you hit the bottom again and again, you are going to destroy all the corals, all the beautiful stuff that actually help to maintain the system. So these are elements of overfishing that together weaken the ecosystem, and as you will see, leads to other issues related to climate change. I said that we take too much fish. Just to give you some numbers. The estimate of illegally caught and legally caught fish roughly is about 100 million tons of fish we take out of the marine ecosystem. 100 million tons. That's a lot of food security, which is great, lots of jobs, lots of dollars, but it also means a lot of stress on the system. 100 million tons of fish is the equivalent of 100 million, roughly, of mature cows that we pull out of the ocean each year. Just think about that. And so this is huge, and all that happens. So when you do that and you mess up the marine ecosystem, and then on top of that, you have climate change hitting the system, warming the surface of the ocean, and fish are like people, right? When it's too hot, we don't feel comfortable. We are lucky we can open our window or put on air conditioner or fan, and if it is too cold, we put on the heater. The fish don't have that. If they are comfortable temperature, if the surface of the ocean where they live goes outside of the surface of their comfortable zone, they either move and find cooler waters, or if they cannot move, they perish. So that's what we're having, the effect of climate change. And then, of course, there is ocean acidification, there is deoxygenation, all sorts of things are happening. Ice is melting, and so on and so forth. So you have climate change, and it's impacting the ecosystem, and therefore the life in it, and therefore the fisheries that depend on the fish and other marine animals. And then it just rolls on. And this is what this picture is showing to you, how you can just start with biophysical stuff, temperature, salinity, hypoxia, acidification. If they are happening, and they are because of climate change, they are going to affect life in the ocean, whether it's organisms or the populations of animals or even communities, and that will hit the fishery. But this is so unidirectional. It's also the other way back, and this is where the overfishing comes in. If you are taking the big fish, too much fish, destroying the habitat, you are leaving less biomass, less life in the ocean, and that has an effect on how the animals can face climate change, right? I like to say that it's like people, right? And we see it vividly with the COVID. I mean, it's very clear that if you are healthy and you are hit by the virus, coronavirus, your chances of surviving are much higher than somebody who is already in a bad health. So the fish are not different. You take down the marine ecosystem, you are going to make them weak in terms of their ability to take all sorts of pressures, including climate change. So that's our entry point here. Now, talking about declining oceans is not just talk. I'm an economist, and I always relate the economy and conservation and sustainability, because the bottom line is when there's no fish, there will be no fisheries, there will be no fish for you to eat. So the starting point is always the fish and the marine ecosystem, really, if you're talking about fisheries. There will be no fisheries without fish. And so the things I've just shown you happening to the ocean are taking down the marine food web. These pictures on my left-hand side are actually depiction of what is happening in the ocean in terms of what stocks we are fishing. And again, it's time from 1950 to now. And what you see is that more and more we are taking fish from systems that are already overfished, from fish stocks that are in trouble. The pictures are produced by the FAO and our group, and the story is similar, going down the hill. And these declines do have consequences of people. The guy there up there showing the shrimp, is it all the shrimp I'm getting after all this work? That is an indication of the impact of people. You go out to fish, you used to go for half a day and you fill your boat, and now you go for a week and you cannot fill your boat. So this is real. And the lady at the bottom is an illustration of what happens when we mess up our real only home, the environment. we are seeing more and more environmental refugees, and we are seeing forced migration. People in Europe will know this very well, right? When West Africans are tight because their fish are gone and all the other things happening, politically, economically, environmentally, what do? People don't just sit down and die. We all do our best to improve and make sure we stay alive. So they move. They're forced to move. Environmental refugees, which is not good for the Africans, it's not good for the Europeans, and everybody in a mess. So this has human consequences, what we do to the ocean. We better think more, balance our short-term and long-term needs wisely. Otherwise, we're all in a mess, really. So how will ending overfishing and even rebuilding fish stocks help? Now, essentially, when you talk about fishing, at least in theory, and I know there are issues with maximum sustainable yield, MSY, but in theory, it's a nice kind of indicator. It's a benchmark to really compare, at least in theory, to see whether you are doing well or not. So if you're fishing, we say you are not overfishing if you are fishing less than what the fish can produce year in, year out, or season from season, because of the ecology and the biology. If you're taking less and less of what the nature can provide, then you are not overfishing. So it's a very simple concept, which in practice can be a lot controversial, but I think the message is clear. And again, you can relate it to a bank account. If you have a saving, and the saving gives you an interest of X amount, say $100 in a given period. If you keep taking $100 or less, then your capital either increases or at least remains the same. But if you take more than your interest, you are overfishing your account, so to say, right? And where you go is not going to be pleasant, really, and it's the same old fish. So that's one point. So a more complete marine ecosystem, when you have all the food web intact, so you don't take all the big fish or you don't take all the forage fish, which are also very important, the anchovies and so on, that big fish eat and keep the whole ecosystem balanced, you're going to have problems because you are truncating the ecosystem, making it less efficient and therefore also less resilient and gets knocked off easily if some shock comes to the system. The same thing with the habitat. Destroy your habitat, you destroy your fishery system because that is the base for the fish biomass. Now, then there are other issues here where if you're fishing less than, some of these things are coming up, relating overfishing to climate change, and new literature and new stuff are coming up. In fact, our base paper for this analysis, and I formed together with our fish, we formed a team of scholars to really dig deep into this, and we are doing a special issue of Frontiers in Marine Science where we will actually elaborate on each of these points with serious science to back this up. But already some papers are appearing. This is a paper led by William Chang, our colleague here at the Institute for the Oceans at UBC. And one of the studies they did was looking at how, that and they found out that if you fish below MSY or equal to MSY, that is if you don't overfish. And if your fish is already overfished, if you build it back so that it can produce the maximum sustainable yield, that will reduce species extinction risk and the climate change by up to 63%. Very powerful results. So just don't take too much fish, and everything being equal, that reduces the chance of you losing your fish because of climate change by over 60%. I think they should let you sit up, right? So it's like a doctor saying that if you make sure that you are in good health, you don't have blood pressure and all the other things, and you are hit by COVID, you have more than 60% chance of surviving it. That's the equivalent here, right? So fish and people are not that different, okay, guys? And so that is one key resource. And then Steve Gain at Santa Barbara and his group of co-authors also looked into it and found that gains in catch, even under climate change, that is if you reduce fishing effort, if you have effective management, if you don't overfish, if you rebuild an overfish stock, that will put you in a position to actually be able to catch a bit more fish, even under climate change. But if you don't, then climate change will take your fishery, your fish stock and your fisheries down. So that is another key result that has come recently. And like I said, more evidence is being built by scientists around the world. Now, so in a way, I've quickly made some connections here between overfishing, climate change, and then how that weakens our marine ecosystems and the fish stocks that live in them, but not only them, also puts our fisheries under risk. It makes it more risky as climate change intensifies. So now, what do? We now, hopefully, I've convinced you guys we need to stop overfishing. We need to end it. But how will you do that? And that is, like I said, this is a problem scientists and managers and the public, NGOs, and even our governments, some of them have been trying to deal with, and it's not easy. So if you ask an economist, he or she will tell you, one of the things you need to do is really to remove the incentive to overfish, because of the nature of fish stocks. They are common property. In some cases, they are open access, like in the high seas. The tendency is for people to overfish, to catch too much, because they are competing and raising for the fish. So you have to somehow put a brake on this. In other words, you have to help us help ourselves. You have to save us from ourselves, actually. We have to build a system that will say, okay, we know you want to grab the fish before this other person grabs it, but please, both of you, pull back, because this will only take us to hell. It will take us to the prisoner's dilemma, where we take out all the fish, and we've seen examples of this around the world, where overfishing is just not talk, it's real. So a number of ways. One, you have to improve national fisheries management, because a lot of fish stocks live all their life within the exclusive economic zones of countries. So for those fish stocks, national management is what will help us avoid overfishing. So that's that. But then not all fish do that. Some go across neighboring country borders, fish don't care about wars, right? They go where they go. So in those cases, if you have a fish, as we do, say in Southern Africa, Namibia, Angola, and South Africa, there are fish stocks that cross their borders. To be able to manage that effectively and stop overfishing and even rebuild in some cases is for these countries to work together. So you need cooperative management. And we have examples of that, Norway and Russia on the cod stocks, here in North America, Canada, and the US managing, say, halibut or Pacific salmon. So you need regional management for that. And then, of course, there are things that go into the high seas. And here you also need larger management, global management, if you like. Or if you are me, you just turn the whole high seas into a fish bank, where the fish can get a break, and when they come, we can catch them cheaply without polluting CO2 and all that. And then you have economic gains, you have ecological gains, and also social, actually, because small countries can then benefit from the fish stocks that spend a lot of their time in the high seas. Illegal fishing, IUU fishing is a big issue. I like to stress on the illegal, because unreported catching fish is not always illegal, right? And one can explain subsistence and artisanal fishing, but illegal, the way to deal with this as an economist is to make this unprofitable. You have to have good surveillance system, you have to catch illegal fishes more often than not, and you have to penalize them one way or the other, through the courts or through the community. Buy insurance, protect yourself by putting part of your ocean portfolio in a marine protected area, MPS, because who knows tomorrow? You never know. We make mistakes, we blow up things. If you have part of your portfolio protected, you are going to be able to come back better if those mistakes come. The same reason why you don't put all your retirement money in Apple computer stocks or Facebook. If you no really good investment advisor will tell you to do that. You have some government bonds, you even have cash, just in case. And that is the way to see protection from an economic point of view. Discipline fishery subsidies. This is a huge one. There's a lot of negotiation going on at the WTO now. They have failed since 2001 to come to an agreement. All of you online, if there's any way you can do to push your governments, to push the WTO to redirect or take out harmful subsidies that lead to overfishing, that will really help us big time. And you don't need to take the money out of the communities. I want more resources into the communities, but these resources should not be used to undermine the resource base that the communities depend on. I really think it's crazy for society to do that. And I could talk about subsidies forever, but that's the thing. And we need to think about one global ocean, because there's so much interconnection between our oceans, whether you're thinking about plastic pollution, climate change, that fish move around. If you don't think globally, you are going to lose a lot of ability to stop overfishing. Yeah, now, a little concept here, very simple model, very simple idea. So I think we need to think about marine conservation and the welfare of people together. I really believe this, because people have to have their decent life, and there's no question about that. And we also know that we cannot undermine our marine resources forever. So we need conservation. And the thing is, as we mediate between people and nature, we need to put in policies, take actions that actually lead to positive feedback from people to nature and nature to people, and never the negative feedback where people are in a tight condition, they hang on the last fish, the fish is gone down, they become more tight. That is what we need to break, that vicious cycle. And I could talk a lot about this in terms of subsidies, which I think I have a few slides to talk about that, and also marine protection. So let's quickly do that. I'm eager to hear your questions, and we get into the debate. So this is a figure that I like to show, because public funds, your taxes, end up being spent by government in various ways. That's why we have governments. But we expect our governments to use our tax resources in order to improve society, preserve our nature, and support people and their livelihoods. But what we are doing currently is completely counter to that. Most of the subsidies we give, about 35 billion, which is at least 30% of the gross revenue of the industry as a whole, which is crazy if you think of sustainability, right? It leads to more fishing. 35%, and over 85% of that, of around 85% of that actually goes to large-scale industrial fleet, to the detriment of small-scale fishes. To me, this is crazy. I have gone into arguments with politicians. One was with Speaker of the House of Assembly of Indonesia. He says, Rashid will continue to give subsidies. I said, sir, why will you want to do that? We want to help the poor. In fact, that's what motivated me to do this research. And I said, sir, by giving subsidies that undermine the resource, you are not helping the poor. You're just making them more vulnerable the next time around. And so this data reveals that, right? So large scale takes the ball, makes the small scale fishes less viable. And this is where all the help is needed, in my view, because that's where most of the fishes are, and they need more resources in there. Now, the other side of the picture actually shows you that 60% of the big subsidy that goes to large scale actually is to overcapacity and overfishing, whilst about 40% of what goes to the small scale is that. So if you just take out the harmful subsidies without doing anything else, you are going to improve the economics of the small scale fishes, because they are going to lose less, and they are going to have better results in terms of the biodiversity preservation of the resource. So subsidies are really big. We need to deal with them. I say that they sabotage the sustainable development goals. They work against no hunger, zero hunger. They work against gender equality, because more women fish at small scale fishes than they do at large scale. So if you give all the money to the large scale, you're aggravating gender inequality. They disadvantage our youth who don't have big boats yet. They start small and go, and they disadvantage the future generation. So this is so negative in how I look at it. We need to help the WTO to deal with that. Then thinking big, as I have alluded to, we have actually one global ocean. All these demarcations we put, exclusive economic zones, and all the different things we put, country borders, the fish, by and large, don't respect this. We need to think of, if you put plastic in one part of the ocean, before you know, it's in the other part of the ocean, and so on and so forth. The dynamics is huge, and we need to think globally. So that's the point. Depletion of stocks in one part, e.g. the high seas, can influence the availability of fish in other parts. So we need to have this in mind. To wrap up here, ending overfishing now would strengthen the ocean, making it more capable of withstanding climate change impacts. Not only that, other shocks too, actually. And then that can contribute to mitigating climate change. And contribute to mitigating climate change. And that is a big one, actually. I don't think I've stressed that. We know that fish, through the biological pump, carbon pump, actually do take carbon down and sequester it for us. So the more biomass you have, everything being equal, the more of this you are going to have, which will help us with the climate struggle. And so, fish is not just for us to eat. Fish has many ecosystem services that we need to think about. We did a calculation of the benefits of high seas fish stocks, high seas alone, and compared the carbon value versus the fish value, catching and selling and eating fish. And the ratio was about 1 to 10 in favor of carbon sequestration values. So we need to think more comprehensively. In general, a healthy person is more likely to survive an epidemic. When I wrote this, COVID-19 wasn't here, but here we are, and we see it all over. I was talking to a group of Africans through the African Development Bank 2 weeks ago, and I said, we're talking about the impact of COVID on food security. And I brought the ocean angle. I gave them all the ocean thing, but I told them ultimately, you know what? You just have to start working hard, not to be poor Africans. Work to be rich, because if you look around the world, anywhere, whether it's in North America or it's in Europe or it's in Africa, those who are really below the poverty line are those who suffer most when this pandemic comes. So again, I like to make this connection with people and fish. So in this way, people in the ocean are not that different. So I will stop here by thanking all of you for spending your time this hour and a half to get this debate. I thank Our Fish, which is actually the NGO that has encouraged me and drawn me into this research. We're grateful. We have a team now. And of course, Sciaena, the NGO from Portugal, running and hosting this, for all your good work and trying to save the ocean. Thanks to all of you. And let's get going with the debate. Thanks
a lot, Rashid. It was very clear. It was a very clear presentation. We thank you a lot. I had seen a similar presentation given by you last year, and still I'm always amazed, surprised to see these data, about subsidies and about overfishing and everything. So it's really good for us to start the discussion here. So by now we have 51 participants. I think some people may join us after, and they will catch this discussion halfway, but it's okay. Right now we have 4 questions, and I would like to invite everybody that has a question or a comment or a suggestion or just simple doubt, please do write your questions on the Q&A box. If we don't have any questions, I have plenty, so I think we can move on. So from Vanessa Ferreira, we have a question, which is, what measures, in your opinion, we can apply to help turn illegal fishing unprofitable? I'm thinking about the example of the glass eel, European eel. It's already illegal to fish glass eel in the majority of European countries, but 1 kilo of glass eel in the black market values 400 euros or more, mostly because the high demand from Asia for aquaculture. Wow, 400 euros.
Yeah.
I think you can see the question, no? You can read it.
Is that a question? Where is it? Where do you have it?
It's in the Q&A, and the question basically is, what measures do you think we can apply to help turn the IUU fishing unprofitable?
Yeah, IUU fishing is a tough one, and because the ocean is vast and the market is vast, the market is connected, consumption, there's a lot of demand. So I would like to go to the consumption issue. I mean, because really, once there's a market for something, no matter our laws, some of us manage to meet that demand. So in general, at a high level, we all have to think about our consumption of fish. And in this, there are two arms to this. We have population growth. So population is growing. There are more mass of fish. So everything being equal, to feed, we're going to demand more food, more fish. The other thing is consumption per capita, which is mainly the problem of the rich, right? So you have more money, you want to eat seafood, and you want to eat tuna and sushi and that. So I think the first thing for each one of us to really evaluate our consumption of fish and ask ourselves, which fish are you eating? Is it for you or your granddaughter or your grandson? I asked myself that question a few years ago, and that has led to a big drop in my own consumption of fish. And I'm always trying to reduce that because really, people are not made to eat a lot of fish. I'm sorry, my Portuguese friends, I know your per capita income, per capita consumption of fish is high. It's part of the culture, but you can agree with me that, I mean, if you don't eat as much fish, you are not going to die, right? So that is from the consumption angle. We need to do that. Now, in terms of practical policy, economists will tell you that people fish illegally because it pays. So we need to have good management systems. We need to be able to make it unprofitable. And this is where you need surveillance systems. You need the community. You don't always need big government surveillance. Communities can work together to really watch their fish and try to make sure they do it well. Smaller countries, when I'm in West Africa, I tell them, the Gulf of Guinea, there are about 16 countries fishing there. You do as if you're all alone in it. No, it's one system. So, and one of the problems we have in the West African waters is not enough ability to monitor and control. If they team up and they chip in and they contribute small, that can lead to a reasonable budget to control and make sure it is. And you also have to have a court system that actually penalizes those who are caught fishing illegally. So these are just a few points that it has been written about. In fact, we had a paper last year in Science Advances where we calculated the amount of illicit trade in fish catch that is going on. We have a nice table talking about what can be done at the global level, national level, community level, and people can get details from that paper and actually other papers too. Thank you.
Could you repeat the name of that paper?
Yeah, it is in Science Advances, that's a journal.
Okay.
It is Sumaila et al. And it's open access, anyone can get hold of it. And the thing is, what is the impact to ecosystem and people of illicit trade in fish catch? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Next question is from Jan Verbeek. Thank you, Jan. So he has a comment and a question. So he says, first of all, thank you very much for an interesting talk. Do you think that future expansion of aquaculture can take the strain of wild fish populations?
Aquaculture, yeah. So this is another area that I'm watching very closely. I'm not an aquaculture economist or scientist like per se. I'm not deep in it, but I do. I've trained a number of PhD students whose interest was aquaculture, and we did it. And so I watch it closely. And in general, I think aquaculture has a role to contribute to food and protein and nutritional fish. But my own take on that is that we are a bit over-optimistic about what agriculture can do. And we need to be careful about that. We need to think of it in a sustainable, strategic way in order for it to contribute. It doesn't just do it because of all the interactions. I mean, agriculture, most of them are underwater, right? So they need the feed, they can pollute the ocean, and many of us just believe agriculture can do everything for us. And I don't believe that. We need to be very cautious. In fact, yesterday around 12 midnight, I submitted a paper on this topic, which I don't want to spill the beans. When it comes out, it's going to be crazy controversial because I stress on the over-optimism of agriculture. And it's unbelievable. People just, there is a paper that says that we can produce 100 times all the fish we eat today in 0.15% of ocean area. 0.15%, 100 times. This is clearly an over-optimistic view of the world in my view. And so, yeah, that's my take. It has a role, but we gotta be careful. Otherwise, we'll blow it, as we always do.
Thank you. I just shared the paper you mentioned. Thanks a lot. Yeah, great. Mm-hmm. I'm going to read it carefully. Claudia Moreira has a question also, and she's asking, how can we communicate our findings to the management entities in an efficient way? I mean, if you conduct, for example, a PhD in the identification of fish stocks and connectivity, and your results indicate that the management plans for specific species are outdated, how do you pass the information to the management agencies? So she's asking basically, how should the researchers actually share the information with the management teams?
Yeah, thank you for that question, because really, fortunately, we are in a different era when it comes to communication and outreach, and scientists, academics, faculty people, researchers are now more and more willing to actually communicate their results and use other means than just the scientific journals, right? And this is why when you wrote me, I couldn't know. I mean, to do this thing, interact with people. So we are in a good place when it comes to that. And there are many means you can do. I have a project called Ocean Canada now, and we have a movie making professor as part of the team. So that, his team, they don't only report our findings, they also document how we do the research to get it out. We use social media, we use documentaries, we use videos. Of course, we do the writing in public. So this is what we need to do. And we talk a lot with policymakers. So NGOs like yours, Our Fish, for example, they got me into the EU Parliament the day the new parliamentarians were coming in the last session. And I talked to them exactly about this. And a lot of new, young parliamentarians, European, who wanted to hear from scientists. And so there is progress that we just have to make sure our science is not just buried in the journals. Bring it out and let people understand as much as possible.
Thank you. So next question is an interesting one from Patrick Murphy. And the question is, small vessels cannot fish safely in deeper water to access fish stocks. So do we see a role for offshore fisheries in any form?
Yes, I mean, I would say the answer is yes, because I think the whole thing is really thinking through the policy and the management plans that we have. At the moment, big fish, big boats and small fish, they are fishing without any organization. And therefore you have lots of big boats fishing where small boats can fish, and actually you have conflicts. So if you can demarcate this, so this needs some sophisticated spatial planning, right? And you know, fish stocks that cannot be taken by small boats, of course, and the big boats can do it sustainably, beautiful. And so it just needs better planning, strategic thinking, and we just have to be more smart in the way we organize our fishing. But yeah, there's a role for that.
Thank you. Question from Diana. Thank you very much for your presentation, Professor. My question is, how would you design a better subsidy policy? What about building capacity for small fisheries? Regards from Mexico. Oh, wow. Hi, Diana from Mexico.
Yeah. So yeah, and again, thank you for the question, because really, if you think about subsidies and you think about the economic roots of subsidies, where does this come from? You go to economic theory, the foundations for subsidies is that as a society, we have the society as a whole, we have our community, if you're thinking of a country, and we have us as individuals. And we as individuals do things in society, most of the time to meet our interests, you know, what we see as our interests. So if you're a company, you are there to maximize profit, fine. provided you do it in ways that conforms with the overall societal goals. So if I am doing fishing and it affects you and affects the environment negatively, and I don't take that into account in my profit maximization, then society will have to come in somehow. And one of the ways is actually through subsidies and taxes. So if you are doing something that is harmful to third parties or to the environment, economists say you tax that because people are overdoing that. You have to pull that back. If you are doing something that supports society, that increases value, and you don't take that into account, actually it's okay to give you subsidies because you are adding value. So we are using fishery subsidies in a very bad way, I think. You know, I gave a talk in Washington, D.C. years ago, and I was saying, you know what, if anyone is overfishing, what you need to do is, I said, it's to tax. And then I pulled back. I said, oh my gosh, I'm close to the White House. I can't say tax. You give them negative subsidies, you know, because when you say negative subsidies, they will like it before they know it's actually a tax, right? So that's what we're supposed to do rather than give money that. So, but you can redirect those subsidies, public funds, to help the community and to help the nature. One example is, how about you pay people to clean up the ocean of plastic rather than to fish for fish? So then you clean the ocean, you give people their incomes, which we all like. We don't want anyone to be in a tight economic situation. And then you give the fish a break so they can grow in the future and feed us better in a sustainable way. So that is the kind of smart thinking. You don't just throw the money to the community. Do it in such a way that it helps nature and people and strengthen us all.
Yes, that's a good segue into our next question, because now you were talking about the top-down approach, and this is a question from the other side. So from a practical perspective, what can common citizens do in their everyday lives to stop or reduce overfishing? Stop eating fish altogether? Having studied these issues, what is your personal position? From Mariana, sorry, I don't think I said from Mariana.
Yeah, so yeah, what can we do? Because it's really true that there are various levels we can do this. At the individual level, if you have a company, at that company level, societal level, our government. But actually, in democracies at least, everything starts with the people. Right? We, the people, decide if we're willing to use our vote. So one of the things I say is, if you're an individual, make sure you vote. Simple and short. And that's your decision, you decide, but make sure you vote. And when you do, don't forget the environment. You're only home. If it's destroyed, you are gone. So go vote. And also, I give talk in high schools in Vancouver here. I tell kids, for example, you guys are more powerful than you think. High school, and they get shocked. I say, you know, if you tell mom and dad what is right and wrong to do, usually we listen to the kids. I mean, no, Dad, you cannot throw your trash like that. Oh my gosh, I sit up, right? So you have that. And write to your representative, write to them a simple letter in your own handwriting. That can be effective. So there are all this, and we need to choose, and I touch on this, how we eat fish. You have to try to eat sustainable fish, eat more abundant small fish rather than going for tuna in the sushi because they are less. So there are lots of things you can do as an individual to get your officials to do the right thing, and you yourself do the best you can to save our ocean and ourselves, actually, ultimately.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting that you are mentioning that, because this month we are having, I mean, we are not having because of the pandemic, but we would have in Portugal this whole month of celebrations and parties where people, yeah, I know we have a lot of Portuguese people watching us, where people do eat a lot of fish, a lot of sardine, and it's quite interesting for us to be talking about this. And we are going to have a webinar, if I may, next Monday precisely on this. And I invite everybody, because it's going to be, it's about reframing the seafood sustainability narrative, and I think it's going to be very interesting. And also adding on that, what can we do? We can, as you were saying, write to our civil servants. We can ask them. We can ask them to take the right steps in the right decision. That's basically what the NGOs, at least the ones we work with here in Europe, do. I know a lot of other NGOs that do it. And so I invite everyone to follow all of these NGOs on social media and everything, because we have a lot of suggestions of what to do. So the next question, yeah.
And if I just add a little bit, you mentioned NGOs and civil society, very important part of the whole of this equation, really. There are many things that would not happen, would not have happened in our society without NGOs. So one of the things I say is choose your NGO and help them. Give them a voice, give them a platform, help them with whatever you can, really. It's a very important aspect of our societies.
Strongly agree with you. Biased, but I strongly agree.
Yeah, of course.
A bit biased.
Yeah. So a colleague from ours, Siegfried, is thanking you for your interesting presentation and is asking, could you please quantify the relationship between fish biomass and how many tons of CO2 can be sequestered in the ocean? I think
I did mention there's a lot of science going on now trying to actually deal with this. In fact, I reviewed a paper yesterday on the 7th, right? Yesterday, I submitted a paper. This is where no, not my paper, but I reviewed where they are looking at the carbon, the biological carbon pump, and how it will do this. So we need to learn more about this. But like I said, we did this paper. I was at Oxford one summer. I spent my time there. And together with Alex Rogers and his team, we actually did the study of the high seas, where we look at the value of the carbon that is taken down. He did the science, I did the economics. And we were looking at 10 times the value of carbon sequestration versus the fish we take from the high seas and eat. So more of this are coming. I think we are going to get more information, more solid information with time. But all indications are that this is big, and that we, the ocean people, have not been good at alerting the world and policymakers about this value, unlike the forest people, right? They have really gone far with this. So there's a lot of scope there.
Yeah, thank you. Next question is from a scientific perspective, so from Filipe Godinho, who asks, how do us as marine biologists or NGOs get into the debates where rules and commissions are decided by politicians, in brackets, who know little about the ecology that is involved in fisheries, and make it more of a social and economical decision? Or socio-economical, I think it's
socio-economic, yeah. I think this is a large problem, a larger problem than even our fisheries, right? And you see ministers who don't know much about what they are dealing with, and yet they make the decisions, right? We see that. And so that's why our systems are made up of civil servants or the system people who really go deep in and support their politicians to make. And what is even worse, we are seeing more and more sometimes governments put people who really hate the ministry and what they do, right, to be in charge, which is quite crazy. Yeah? So I say that I want to abolish the Minister of Education, and then I'm put there as the Minister of Fisheries or the Minister of Environment, my God. So the problem is bigger than fish, and I think that's something for political scientists and other people in this field to deal with. It's quite a huge problem, you know. I was at the US Senate and giving a talk, and I made a comment. I said, you know what? At the university, we talk a lot about conflict of interest. I couldn't be in a decision that is a decision about my own student because I have a conflict of interest. But in politics, it seems the more conflict of interest you have, the more they give you the portfolio, right? Really, I mean, so it's quite weird, but that's how politics works, because people send you there to do certain things. So it's quite a huge problem, and I think we just have to get more people to think about this. I'm trying to say,
yeah, sorry,
I'm not qualified to deal with it, really, but these are my insights. Yeah.
Could you maybe we have half an hour and we have some questions, but taking that subject, could you maybe elaborate on the main differences between going to the European Parliament and going to the White House? What do you face? What are the most different things that you hear from the representatives, MEP in this case, or I don't know?
That's very interesting, actually. Question. I have to think a bit. So my visit to the White House was very interesting. I was actually invited by the then head of the Office for Budget. What do they call it? Office for Budget and Management. Yeah. And this was because we published a paper where I actually introduced together with a colleague the idea of intergenerational discounting, how to value future benefits to make sure that we don't mess up future generations. So we came up with this nice little model coming from intuition, not basic economics. All I said is, if you just think of the flow of fish to various generations, if you have two generations, we are here, and your granddaughter who will be coming in 30, 50 years time, and you put these two generations and say, should we manage our fisheries? If they are just thinking about themselves, the person here will say, allow me to fish as much as I want to fish because they want the fish and the fish value now. But the granddaughter will say, hey, wait a minute, wait until I come. Don't take any fish. Wait until I come so I can take it. And both are talking from their interest, which is fine. But if I'm here doing research and managing the fisheries with respect to the interests of both, I would think the answer is in the middle, right? So that motivated me to think of intergenerational discounting, where we take the future generation interest explicitly into the way we value future fish. So that was what came up. So I got invited to talk about this, and everybody, when I finished, my host was very happy, saying, Rashid, you know what you say, I agree with you. But here in this house, we think only 4 years. So 4 years. So it's like I'm dreaming about the future. It's about elections for 4 years. So that tells you a lot of our political system and what do we need to do with that. Now, my last visit at the European Parliament, it was a bit different. I was taken there, mainly the NGO worked and got a number of MPs to listen to my talk and to talk one by one with me. We had lots of young members, and many of them are from the Green Party in European countries. So they really were out there to get information that they can push legislation. So that was a bit different. And some of them were even more enthusiastic than me about the conservation, which was good to see, right? So that's the difference I saw from the two visits.
That tells you also that sometimes the Green parties need this kind of information. Sometimes they just tell us, just give us something, to give us papers to support our work in, and that's a big change. And I think that's super nice for us, and it really validates our work.
Absolutely, and actually, they like the idea of economics and conservation.
Yeah.
Because they tell me, I'll tell you a story I missed. When I started talking about intergenerational discounting, there was a guy in one of my talks, and he was so happy and so impressed. He said, you know what, I'm going to invite you to give a talk at the annual meeting of US bishops. US bishops, because they are looking for economic argument. When they go to Washington to fight for conservation, they tell them it's all about the market, about the money. So now they have an economic argument to do this. So you are right. I mean, there are people who are looking for arguments to help them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And if you're talking to people who just think 4 years in advance, you have to find an economic argument. Otherwise, there's no reason.
It doesn't move. Exactly. Yeah. Excellent.
Should I do the next one, Anna?
Yeah.
So a question from Maria is, do you think that the certification systems or certification schemes can help with the overfishing problem, especially illegal fishing?
Yeah, okay. Another good question, and something I've dabbled into, actually. Me, Daniel Pauly, and Tony Pitcher, we did a little piece about this. And our take was that in theory, certification can help if you do it properly and well, like most other policies. So in theory, yeah, if you let more and more consumers make them conscious to choose sustainable fish versus illegally caught or unsustainable fishing, I think in theory it has a place, you know. Now it comes to the practice. It really comes to the practice. How do you measure, you know? And I was actually on the stakeholder, I was a stakeholder on the Marine Stewardship Council team because of my in theory, believing that it can help. But more and more, the practice makes it really difficult because there's a lot of mislabeling. And most people, it's just difficult for them to they don't even know what fish species and so on. And so it complicates it. In terms of implementation, it's a challenge. That's what I would say.
Sorry. Yeah, so adding on that, Patrick Murphy has another question, right, which I think links quite well with this certification question, which is, would traceability solve the problem of overfishing where the vessels is linked to the fish? Because traceability is a very important dimension of certification schemes.
Yeah.
Do you think traceability can have a major role to play on this, on stopping that?
Yeah, actually I do. I mean, if we can have good traceability systems, actually, that will take some of the implementation problem away of certification, because the key thing is how to really follow the fish and make sure it's the fish they say it is, right? That's one of the big problems. When people do DNA tests, they see that even in Canada, you have mislabeling of up to 30, 40. So you can imagine. So yeah, that can help improve our ability to use certification to contribute to sustainable fisheries. But again, it's also about the cost and who is able to do this. We have the developed country thing. Most of the fish, a lot of the fish is caught in developing countries and traded with the developed world. So this kind of schemes, if they are very expensive and out of the ability of developing countries to use them, then we have a problem, right? So, my God.
Yeah.
No panacea. Huh?
That's one of the main questions that arises when we start talking about certification schemes. That's basically it. Yes, Nick, sorry.
No worries. So next question, it's anonymous, but the question is, what would you say to a person with no background in biology or economics that suggests that an increase in the market price of fish could lower the demand as a measure to end overfishing?
Yeah.
Tricky.
So the market system is the mechanism through which we can regulate the distribution of fish, and scarcity is a bad word, but it's real, right? I mean, we all can't just eat all the fish we need at the same time. And if the price is low, everything being equal, demand goes up. I mean, that's a basic truism for most products, not all. There are instances where the higher the price, the more you get biased, but that's not the kind of product we're talking about here. Maybe tuna sashimi in some restaurants in Japan. Yeah, that does. So the price is a mechanism that does that. I think the problem we have is when you use the price to allocate, you leave a lot of people out of getting fish to eat. And so it's a dilemma for economics in many areas, right? That's why economics alone cannot be relied upon to really run the world. We need to have other measures. One of the things we can do to soften this blow, and I've been thinking a lot about this since the COVID-19 came, and not only me, many people, even politicians like Mr. Yan of the United States, talking about universal basic income. If the world or each country could do something like that, that will make the market allocation more reasonable, where at least you know that you are not going to starve a big proportion of your population if you let the market allocate this. Yeah. It's tough.
This one is a tricky one, yeah, because you don't want to leave people with less resources outside of this consumption. Maybe it's more a matter of how we consume and the choices we make than leaving people outside of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question, do you see any similar management structures between land-based harvesting and the harvesting of the oceans?
Yeah, so land and ocean. I see a big connection between for food security, right, and sustainability actually. So more and more, I'm beginning to feel that we cannot talk about land and ocean separately when we are talking about food security. And so you have to think more comprehensively because there are lots of interactions, right? I mean, there are lots of, if you look at the coastal zone, what happens on land impacts the ocean and vice versa. So we need to think about that. And if you look at the feed to aquaculture, there is a relationship between what land. People are saying, let's do the agriculture on land, but it needs feed, it needs water, it needs all the inputs, and so there is interaction. So I think more and more the ocean and even freshwater and ocean people need to talk more with the land and land people and vice versa if we are going to get comprehensive solutions to our food and environment issues.
Sure. So another question from Patrick Murphy. He says, sorry for all the questions. No worries, Patrick, keep on coming. But so here's another question from him. What are the view on the movement towards offshore energy and the unknown as of yet, and the unknown as of yet effects on the spawning grounds and recruitment on the annual calculation of the various stock biomass? So yeah, this relationship between offshore wind power, I imagine, and recruitment.
Yeah. So I think this is alluding to the push for blue economy, right? For blue economy. And I like to say, whatever we do with the blue economy, we have to think sustainability, we have to think inclusiveness. Because if we miss those two, we are going to repeat the mistakes that we have. And another thing to note is that it's not like the ocean is being discovered today, right? There are lots of activities there. So if you're going to do wind energy, you have to think about what it will do to life in the ocean, to the habitats and all the other activities, shipping and all that. How do they relate? I mean, it's not a place where there's no activity, and we have to think deep about this. Related to offshore energy is also deep sea mining and all the other activities people are talking about. Some just think there's so much wealth under the deep sea that we need to go and take. And my thing is be cautious because there's a lot of sensitive habitat. And actually, I don't think most of they're just dreams, I think. We'll go rip up the bottom of the ocean in the deep and discover all our dreams are not real. By then it's too late. So don't rush into it. Especially don't use public funds to support this, because I think that is what is going to be initially. We just push public funds and let them go in there, find nothing, they pack their bag and walk away and leave us with more problems in the ocean. No wonder.
And especially in such a vulnerable ecosystem, you know, that it's going to take years and years and years and years
to come back.
It's crazy, actually.
Yeah, it is. And I wanted to say, Patrick, let the questions flow. It's good. We are not. Yeah, it's a good thing you have many.
We have another one at least. So.
Oh, all of you, all those, the audience.
Good. I'm going to make this question from Jesus. He's from Canary Islands. I didn't know we had so many people from around the world. I'm super happy about it. He starts with a comment and he says, in addition to overfishing and climate change, the introduction of non-indigenous species is known to be responsible for the loss of biodiversity and severe changes in ecosystems, including their destruction. In the Canary Islands, we have these three driven forces acting together. So overfishing, climate change, and non-indigenous species. But no study has been done to know how and how much each affects marine resources, ecosystems, and consequently the local economy of some oceanic islands, where the main fishing is small-scale fishing, of course. Do you know of any study in which these three driving forces are evaluated in an integrative way? Good question. Do you know of any study?
Together. Yeah. I mean, my simple answer is no. I'm not aware of, especially introduction of alien species in waters. Yeah, there is a lot on climate change, overfishing, even pollution, right? And the multi-stresses. But I haven't seen one. And so that's a good question, right?
He actually proceeds asking, could you give us your opinion on the consequences on the arrival of numerous non-indigenous species on islands? And islands is the keyword here. Could you give us the opinion on the consequences of this introduction with and small and highly vulnerable populations? Do you have an opinion on this?
Yeah, I mean, people who study ballast water, the ships carrying all these foreign species into different ballasts. Huh? Yeah, so there has been studies that have shown the effects of that. They can come in and just mess up your ecosystem, chase out and sometimes kill off the indigenous species because they are so different. Sometimes they come with disease. In fact, that's one of the problems of aquaculture when you have escapees going into the wild, right? And mixing up with the indigenous species. And so there are studies here and there, but having a comprehensive study that looks at this would be very valuable. I want to add that, sometimes the new ones are not, especially in terms of economics, they are not completely negative. I think in Norway, in northern Norway, I don't know. I know there is a blue crab or something that came into the system, never there before. And okay, initially it was a big problem because they didn't know how to handle it, and it was messing up and killing the other species. But slowly they've learned how to exploit that, and it's really returning a lot of economic benefits, right? The harm to the environment is another thing that they're saying economically. Now we learn how they have gear that can do that. So you have that, but this is something we need to watch very carefully and understand because it can cause lots of environmental harm.
All right. Next question from Patrick Murphy again, who I understood from previous question is writing us from Ireland, and he works in the industry. And this question is more related to that. So the question is regarding again the traceability issue. How about the traceability charge of 50 euros per user in the chain from net manufacturer to vessel to fishmonger to retailer for the year under a traceability platform we are developing? And I think, from what I understand, this is related to a working group from regarding Irish waters from ICES. That's what I understand from the question.
So essentially, they are charging participants in the fishery 50 euros.
I think this is an idea. I think this is
an idea
for a traceability platform that apparently this group in Ireland or working in Irish waters is working on, which I didn't know about. So it's a direct question from this Patrick Murphy.
Yeah. No, that's good. I haven't heard about it, but that is an industry-initiated initiative, I guess, right? Or is it state?
Seems like it, or at least with a strong participation from the industry. Of course, Patrick Murphy can write in the Q&A box if he wishes to give more information, but I think this is the concept of the idea. Yeah.
Patrick added that it's being developed. It's
being developed,
like an app, I think.
A platform. He said.
A platform, yeah. It's being developed.
No. I think it's a good thing. The more the private sector can contribute, the better, right? Because ultimately, if you're thinking a little bit medium long term, that is going to help them, right? There are initiatives around the world by different groups that try to really become engaged in the effort to sustain the fish stocks and therefore the fisheries. Here in BC, there's a group that I like very much. They call them they like to say young fishermen of BC, and I keep telling them it's young fishers of BC, right? So, and I like them a lot because they're very progressive, what they're doing is that they want to run smart fishing businesses that have sustainability and conservation at the center, because they say we know that without the fish we're gone. So they have annual meetings, they invite people to talk about this and help them design together with the government and the necessary authorities, systems, management system that can help. And I think their boats, they agree to put, all those electronic gadgets to actually count the fish they take and report it to the authorities. So there's a nice co-management system. And I think the more we have that, the better. That shouldn't replace the official policy system. It should be used to enhance and complement it, I think.
Okay. If you don't mind, I have a question of my own. Could I? We have one more question from the audience. Yes. And then I think we can finish with that question because it's more generic. I'm sorry. And then I have a question. When you mentioned, and I have been following your work on harmful subsidies. I actually had read some of your papers, and recently I read one, which I think it's from 2020 already. And I was quite interested when you mentioned before that harmful subsidies can help to increase the gender inequality. Could you elaborate on that? Because that's something I have never thought about, and it made quite a sense when you said it. So could you please
elaborate more? Yeah. So there are pieces of research that helped me to make that statement. And one of them is that if you look at women fishing, actual fishing, we find out, Sarah Harper, my student, she just finished, she looked at women contribution to fishery economics around the world. What she found is that women are, if I remember well, about 20% of those who fish in small-scale fisheries around the world are women. But in large-scale fisheries, the percentage is much, much lower. All right. So that's one piece of information. Okay. So if you want to give subsidies that will help level the playing ground, you want to give it, everything being equal, you want to give it to small scale than large scale because women are more active there. So that's one piece. The second piece of information is that whilst the actual women fishers are far from 50% of the total number of actually people who fish, in the processing sector and added value sector, actually women are a bit more than 50%. And again, most of our subsidies goes to actual fishing. So if I had money to put into processing added value versus fishing, I'll put it in added value because that again will support more women active there than in the melting, and actually also adds value. It's like you take one fish, you get the most out of it rather than take more fish. So that's another piece that helps me to make that statement. And like I said, the subsidy amounts go predominantly to the large scale. So it messes up both of these pieces of arguments, you know. And so I build that argument that way. And finally, we all know that almost everywhere women are disadvantaged. This is the nature of the history of the world. And I think most people in goodwill want to correct this historical wrong. And I saw one study which came out, and they were looking at legal fairness, legally, how our courts and systems, our legal system treats men and women. And they could find only 6 countries where men and women are treated fairly in the legal system. All the other countries, women are not treated fairly. So this is only the legal system. We're not talking about culture. We're not talking about religion, my God. So to me, that's the last thing I will do with my public funds to aggravate the situation of women.
That's only, I'm sorry, just one more comment. That's only another reason for the Sustainable Development Agenda, the Agenda 2030, to be pushing for the end of harmful subsidies, huh? Because it touches around another SDG, so it's quite interesting, actually. I didn't know that. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, good.
All right, so I think we're going to go to our last question because we're closing in on the hour. So the last question comes from Filomena Borba. Thank you, Filomena. So the question is, well, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting and fruitful. My question is about ocean industries. how can those industries help balance their activity with sustainable management of marine resources?
So how can they? Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Anna.
No, I was just commenting. This is the $1 million question. It's a really good question for us to finish the webinar, no?
Yeah, fantastic. So how do the industry themselves help to balance? Yeah, and yeah, I agree with you because
I think both the seafood industry and probably also these new blue economy industries that are surging. I think it's a general, maybe more holistic use of the word industry.
Yeah, so that is great. So we talk about our government system, our policy, and we talk about individuals. So how about the industry in the middle, which is great because we need the industry. Why? Because they are very influential. They are very powerful. They can lobby. They can change legislation and do something. So we need to get them on board. And there are more and more companies at least saying to us they care about this and they're doing something about this. We have the World Economic Forum, which is a big platform for industrial participation in trying to help the world be more sustainable. So we need more action from there. And we actually need the NGOs who are here. You can help us push industry to actually do the right thing. And scientists were also in the same boat, trying to reveal the consequences to them, but to the larger consumer base they have. We sustain them and we need our environment to work. So various platforms, some of them will take action by themselves, but a lot of them need nudging by we, the people, NGOs, civil society, and our governments for them to do the right thing for them.
So yeah, holistic approach to a holistic question.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So should we finish, Nick?
I would say so. So just as a quick marketing moment, if Professor Rashid you allow us, we're gonna have two webinars in the next week. So this Thursday, of our first in a series of 5 webinars about aquaculture. We started talking about aquaculture in this Q&A session. So we're following in on that with a series of 5 webinars about aquaculture. The first one being this Thursday at 3:30 Portuguese time, so 4:30 CET, with Professor Doris Soto from Chile, who worked for 10 years and as an aquaculture senior officer at FAO. So feel free to join us for that. And on the 15th, Anna, you know it better than me.
Yeah, we are going to have this webinar I was telling you before about the seafood sustainability. It's going to be quite interesting. It's based on a paper with the same name, Reframing Seafood Sustainability Narrative. And the key speaker is going to be Professor Michael Tlusty from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. So yeah, I think it's going to be super interesting. And I would like to thank you again, Rashid, very much. It was super clear, super enlightening. Thank you so much for being available to do this. I would like to thank our participants that posed a lot of good questions. I don't know, Nick, if you want to say anything else, or are we finishing right on time?
Yeah, right on time, which is rare for Portuguese people. So thank you very much.
That's good. Thank you all, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rashid.
Take care.
Take care. Right. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Yeah, thanks. Happy World Ocean Day. Huh?
It's
and you
true.
too.
We didn't mention it. The Happy World Ocean Day to everybody. It's close.
Yeah. There are still about 40 of them online. 37.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.